Oh. The rush is on for e-passports. The deadline approaches.
And the woman accused of killing her husband was back in court today. Find out why.
Strong opposition by gaming houses and their attorney as banks refuse to take their money. I'm Clint Watson, and hear their reaction ahead in the Bahamas tonight.
Now in HD. ZNS Network presents The Bahamas Tonight. This portion of the news brought to you by BTC Every Day.
The manual Bahamian passport will soon be phased out, making way for the e-passport by November 2015. Good evening, everyone. I'm Charisma Robinson.
And I'm Chris Saunders. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Now, thousands of Bahamians have already picked up the electronic document. However, there are still thousands more who have yet to apply. LaDawn Davis talked to the Minister of Immigration, the Honorable Fred Mitchell, tonight, who says despite a passport expiring in years, some countries have already stopped taking non-e-passports.
If you haven't gotten an e-passport, you need to put a rush on it. Officials say come November of this year, passport holders who have not adhered to the reminders to acquire the updated document will not be allowed to travel with the old passport. Foreign Affairs Minister, the Honorable Fred Mitchell, explains why.
With this Easter break, there's a heavy load on the passport office. There'll be a lull right after Easter, but shortly before the summer holidays, there's going to be another deluge of applications, and it's important for people to get in early because it's still an 8-week time period before you can get a passport. And people should know that in some countries have already stopped taking the written passport, so they need to get on board this idea of getting the proper passport.
The immigration minister says so far at least 126,000 Bahamians have e-passports, but Mitchell says there are many more who need to apply.
That when they try and cross the border after November with those passports, they will be useless. So they've got to change them. And right now, I haven't experienced this for myself, but right now I'm told that if you pass through the U.S. Customs facility, they will not accept those passports now. So that's the issue. So they're welcome to try, but the passport issue must be resolved, and they need to go and get the e-passport.
A collapse in the existing software has forced a slight delay in the processing of applications, and Mitchell says his team is doing all it can to speed up the process. Meanwhile, he says special provisions to obtain e-passports will be given to residents in the Family Islands.
400 people subscribe for passports. There is a cry to come back again. It is budget again, so I'm going to be speaking with the Chief Passport Officer. There's going to be a change in administrations coming there shortly as well, so we'll be getting a new Chief Passport Officer, I think, during near the end of the year or the middle of the year, and so it may be possible to do another exercise where we actually go over to Eleuthera and to these other places like Exuma and have the portable equipment to make sure that people get their passports.
The cost of a passport is now $45, but after November, immigration officials say they may increase the fee to $100. Meanwhile, you can now apply for an e-passport online by logging on to epassport.bahamas.gov.bs. LaDawn Davis, ZNS Network News.
Well, police are investigating a homicide on Long Island. Shortly after noon today, a foreign national was found dead at his residence in Clarence Town. A team of detectives from CDU are on the ground continuing the investigation. ZNS News will update you as soon as we get additional information.
In news from the courts, Australian native Donna Vasily was back in court today asking for bail. And as friend Carrie tells us, the defendant did not get the results she was hoping for during that bail hearing.
Citing the speed at which murder-accused Donna Vasily's bail application reached the Supreme Court, Crown Prosecutor Neil Brathwaite gave the court a number of reasons why the Crown was opposing it. He noted that the 54-year-old Australian, who is accused of killing her husband, podiatrist Philip Vasily, is a flight risk. He stressed that the murder happened in the affluent community of Old Fort Bay in western New Providence, and the defendant has access to significant resources. Brathwaite also noted that the defendant has only been in custody a few days after being arraigned on Monday. However, Vasily's attorney, Murray DeSille, argued that she is not a flight risk, noting that she is a permanent resident who has substantial ties to the community, including homes and businesses. He noted that his client maintains her innocence, has no previous convictions, and will not pervert the course of justice or interfere with witnesses. DeSille also pointed out that while affidavit evidence revealed that Vasily admitted having a fight with her husband and allegedly had visible apparent injuries to her hand, no injuries were visible to the defendant's hand as she sat in court Thursday. After hearing from both sides, Justice Stephen Isaacs refused to grant Vasily bail on the grounds that there has been no unreasonable delay in the case. He also cited the speed in which Vasily's bail application reached Supreme Court, calling it unusual. Fern Carey, ZNS Network News.
3 Bahamians and an American made their first appearance in court today before Magistrate Andrew Forbes to be arraigned in connection with that major drug bust in South Bimini 3 days ago. The defendants are 52-year-old American Gary Stalt, 36-year-old Carvin Bain, 22-year-old Jason Dumvart, and 38-year-old Kamani Dalton. They are facing a laundry list of drug charges in connection with the drug seizure. The drugs were discovered after police and DU agents acting on a tip boarded a 30-foot sailing sloop with American registration in the South Bimini Marina, where they found 436 pounds of marijuana on board. The drugs have a street value of about $436,000. In court, the defendants pleaded not guilty to all charges. Bail was denied and they were remanded to prison. They returned to court on June 22nd for trial.
Local commercial banks are being labeled discriminatory with their decision not to accept web houses money under a regulated environment. Canadian-based banks have all refused to take the money, labeling the funds as an increased risk for money laundering. And as Clint Watson tells us tonight, attorneys for all of the web shops, as well as the country's largest web boss, is not taking kindly to these responses and are calling for compliance with the law.
The question is, are commercial banks within their rights to refuse the funds of regulated web shops, or is this policy against the law and unfair as deemed by those in the gaming sector?
I think a lot of their latest claims and statements are reckless, irresponsible, and a total disregard for the law.
The only policy seems to be a racist policy, which is troubling.
I think it would raise very interesting legal questions.
I personally believe it has nothing to do with the what, but it has everything to do with the who.
Island CEO Sabaz Bastian and gaming attorney Wayne Munro believes a decision by banks not to take their money is not evidenced enough with facts, but rather what they perceive to be ulterior motives. They're joined in their views by Alfred Sayers, whose clients also operates web shops. He called it a misguided decision and subversion of the rule of law in the Bahamas.
Licensed gaming houses are treated as financial institutions with the same obligations as banks with respect to KYC as well as sources of funds. And for one set of financial institutions to say that they will not do business with other financial institutions that are licensed and supervised by a national regulatory agency is a subversion of the law.
The gaming bill passed last November. It made room for both casinos and web shop operators to conduct business. Munro finds it contradictory as he revealed that banks are already taking his clients' money.
It is receiving monies from them into the government's account monthly because the gaming taxes are paid monthly. And so if they have a policy that they're not going to accept any of the money, then they need to close all of those companies' accounts, which they have not done.
Commercial banking executives have said their corresponding international banks have expressed issues with web proceeds being banked and could cease business should they opt to take the funds. But Munro says it should not be a problem, as Bank of the Bahamas has said their international partners, which are believed to be the same as those for the other commercial banks, have no issues. And here's why Munro feels that way. Scotiabank is reportedly Atlantis' banker, and CIBC First Caribbean reportedly is the bank for Bahamar, both of whom operate online gaming. And in the attorney's eyes, it's far from more of a risk to banks than local gaming houses.
Web shops are limited to B-dollar transactions, which isn't a convertible currency, are limited to residents here. whereas Atlantis, Bahama are able to game online with the world.
And to say that you will not take it from Bahamian-owned and operated gaming house operators, it would also be discriminatory.
Monroe suggests that should banks not change their policy after the regulation takes place, that the government ought to reconsider regulating these banks, particularly if, in his view, they continue with racist policies. Clint Watson, ZNS Network News.
Executive Director of the Bahamas Chamber of Commerce and Employers Confederation, Edison Sumner, shares a different view. He says they respect the bank's decision in this instance.
They have to look at not only what is happening now, they're looking at the history of these operations as well. And the fact is that until these entities are properly licensed, the revenues that they would have been earned outside of the formal economy. The banks are looking at this. The banks have their policies. We respect the bank's policies as it relates to who they're prepared to accept deposits from. And we understand the risk of money laundering that they have expressed concerns about. We understand the other risks that are related to doing banking generally. So while we understand the gaming sector's concerns about certain banks accepting or not accepting their deposits, we also understand that the banks have rules to follow, and the rules that they're following aren't necessarily rules that are only unique to that bank, but these are international banking rules.
Here are the latest on the Melia gratuity issue.
Also, the countdown is on to the Junkanoo Carnival. Jared Higgs apparently has all the details. You're watching the Bahamas Tonight.
This portion of the news is brought to you by the new Shell and Letty, designed for extra miles.